Hello, and thank you all for joining me for another episode of the Roots Podcast. In this episode, I want to dive a little deeper into the concept of the República de Españoles, or the Spanish Republics. Last week, I touched a little bit on the Spanish republics while we were discussing the indigenous republics. The indigenous republics, of course, were the counterparts to the Spanish republics in Nueva España society. So within the Spanish Empire, civic life, private life was very much based within cities and towns. The entirety of the country was not referred to as a republic because it wasn't a republic. The entirety of Nueva España was referred to as a viceroyalty. But the local towns were referred to as republics. They had some type of voting rights for property owning men that lived within Spanish communities. The king also, and the viceroy also had the right to appoint people to local jurisdictions. And so, any one of these Repúblicas de Españoles could always be overwritten by the crown, essentially. One interesting thing I'd like to point out about the República de Españoles is that, they were not densely packed together. So, for example, if you drive for an hour in Los Angeles County, you don't know where one city ends and the next city begins. Everything is just pretty much densely packed together. That's not what life was like back then. Back then, these Spanish settlements were, they were spaced far apart from each other in many cases. Going from one Spanish town, one República de Españoles, to another Spanish town, that could take a day. It could take a couple days. It just depended on how far, the city was from Mexico City. Mexico City was a major stopping point for newly arriving Spanish families. They would stop either in the city of Puebla or in Mexico City before traveling to other parts of the Spanish Empire. And so, depending on where they were going, it could take a day or a couple days, etc. Now, in central Mexico, Spaniards, they either built towns next to friendly indigenous communities, or, they built towns in isolated areas. And if they were surrounded by hostile natives like the Chichimecas, they would bring allied indigenous communities with them, most notably the Tlaxcaltecas and the Purépechas, and build new indigenous communities, right next to the newly established Spanish communities.